I'm building more efficiently so I can be more wasteful. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're talking about some things to take into account before building off grid, before buying land, before doing the homestead. If you guys don't know, my name is John Dawson. I have built my house from scratch with my two hands and some tools, obviously. But I did build it myself. We purchased some acreage and I drew up the plans. I framed up the entire house. I did the foundation. I did everything. The only subcontractor that came in was a roofer and then an electrician to wire the electrical panel. But other than that, I do have quite a bit of experience in land development, building, stuff like that. Cut all my roads myself, driveways, all of the plumbing, the electrical in-ground conduit, the well. I didn't drill the well, but I did bring the water to my house. So I've done a lot of this stuff, and I wanted to give you guys a couple things on what to think about that kind of, I wouldn't say surprised me, but were a little more shocking than I had expected. But I'm just going to go like, 1 through 4 or 5 and just kind of give you guys some things to consider if you're thinking about buying land and doing the homestead thing or going off grid. The first one is not all land is the same. Not all the land is the same. You have land that already has ag exemption, which means you can actually piggyback off that ag exemption, which is a lot easier than filing for first time ag exemption. For example, where we live used to be a cattle ranch, and they had ag exemption, so we could actually grandfather that ag exemption into our property. So we didn't actually have to go apply for additional ag exemption. So that's a bonus. You can't always find it, but it is a bonus if you can find someone that already has ag exemption. When you buy that land, you actually get that ag exemption. And I think you have 2 years to build fence and actually get your livestock on your land. The other thing is being on the outside portion of a municipality. So for example, if you're outside of city limits, a lot of times, I know here in Texas, not so much in California or the East Coast or West Coast, but in the Midwest and a lot of areas, if you're outside of the municipality region, you won't have building inspections, which is it's a positive and a negative. For me, building my house myself, I could keep in touch with the quality of the build. Obviously, I went above and beyond when it comes to code. But it does make it a lot easier, a lot smoother to build because you're not waiting for, framing inspections, plumbing inspections, electrical inspections. You can just go. You can just go, and you can get it done a lot quicker, which in turn usually saves you money, especially if you're using a contractor. The downfall of not having inspections is obviously just shoddy work. People, cutting corners and stuff like that. So if you are outside of a municipality and you're not required to have inspections, I would keep a very close eye on just all the steps that are happening. Ask questions as your contractor moves forward. Just keep an eye on them. I would highly suggest hiring a contractor that does a lot of really good work. That way, it's just in their blood that they're going to do it right in the first place. So that's a positive, though, in my book, being outside of your inspection zones. If you can be, it just makes for what you do with your home, whether you're building a barn dough, whether you're building, a post frame in some way, shape, or form. You don't have that regulation that you would have if you were inside the city limits. The other question is, how far are you from the grid? How much is it going to cost to get electricity to your house? If you're going off grid and you're doing solar, that's great. I personally like to have an on-grid facility, an on-grid run to my home for times where, if you have livestock, if you need lights, if you need, a well pump, if you need stuff that could draw an unknown amount of power if things were to go, whichever way, it's nice to have access. For me, the reason I got the span panel, which is an electrical panel, is because I can switch to off-grid and on-grid. So I don't have to touch my on-grid power. If I don't want to, I can use all of my solar, which I'm still working on setting up my solar. But when my solar is set up, I'll be able to use solar 100% for everything. And whenever my solar runs out, if it ever runs out, I do still have the grid attached to my home, so I can flip over to the grid if need be, but I don't have to use it. So it is just a nice option. If you are going full off grid and you're going to be running generators, you're going to be running solar, then that's great too. And then you don't have to worry too much about being too far from the grid. It's just very expensive to run telephone poles, 10 miles somewhere. It can get costly. So just keep an eye, keep thinking about that if you're buying land and you want to be on the grid. The other thing is well. You're going to have to drill a well, which in a lot of places you can go anywhere from 1,000 feet to 180 feet when you're drilling a well, and well drillers price you by the foot. So if you're drilling 1,000 feet, obviously it's going to be significantly more expensive than if you're drilling 150 feet. So if you know where the water table is, if there's other wells around the area, usually you can call a well drilling company and say, hey, here's the address or here's the general location of where I'm wanting to drill. Have you drilled wells in that area? Can you look up on, government information to the local information and see what's the closest well and how deep they had to drill. It'll give you a rough idea of how deep you might have to go to get water. That is one thing that is required to be registered with your county is your well. What kind of home are you wanting to build? And how do you want to build it? Because some homes, if you're outside of city limits, you can build really anything you want. If you're inside of city limits in some way, or you have inspection or code requirements, then you are, held to certain parameters as to what you're allowed to build. It does get looser when you're out on more land, but still they will have some requirements. But I think getting to the nitty gritty and being like, are we going to be building a post frame or not a post frame, a pier and beam foundation, which is a raised foundation? Are we going to be doing a slab foundation? Comparing those to your land, like this house is on a hill. And the front of the house is probably 4.5, 5 feet off the ground. The back of the house is about, 2 feet off the ground. So me doing a post frame saved me tons and tons of money of dirt work because I have concrete pillars coming out of the ground versus having to dig all this out, flatten the dirt, pour a slab. I was just able to build out of the dirt and the ground just stayed at a slope the way it was in the first place. So knowing your land, knowing the topography of what you're dealing with, you can then better choose, okay, I think it's going to save us a ton to do a pier and beam, or hey, I think, we're going to do a slab, whatever it is. You can watch my other video about pier and beams and slabs. I lean towards pier and beam. I like them, but I have no problem with slabs. There's no problem with them. It just depends on what you're doing. Next, I would recommend getting a highly efficient build style. A lot of people think off grid means building cheap. And I think off-grid needs to kind of change to building efficiently. So you guys know I have a very intense insulation structure on my home. This is just the guest house that we're in now until we build the main house. But even then, I wanted to build it with the most efficient, in the most efficient way possible. And that was with exterior insulation to break that thermal bridge, interior insulation, the rock wool, attic insulation, roof insulation on the exterior of my home. All of that created a home that can run on very little energy because when I am fully solar, I don't want to have to switch to the grid. I want to be able to power my home, use my computers, my TVs, everything else, and I want to make sure that what I want to use my power for is what I use my power for. I don't want to be draining my solar bank on just keeping my house warm or keeping my house cool. I want to be able to do that very inexpensively because of the structure that I've built, the efficiency of my home, and then I can use the electricity for the fun things. I don't think living off grid or being off grid or doing homestead means you need to neglect the fancy shiny things. I think it means you need to build your life more efficiently so you can enjoy those things, right? I'm not here. I'm building more efficiently so I can be more wasteful, if that makes sense. And I don't mean wasteful in like the negative way. I mean like I want to I consume less electricity than most people that you would know in a half the size of the house that I have. But the reason I consume less electricity is because my home is so efficient. So all of this frivolous stuff, my perfectly conditioned room, my lights for my camera setup, my laptops, my Xboxes, my TVs, my electric fireplace, whatever it is, all of that may seem excessive, but I'm still consuming less power than I would say the average American by a lot. And that's what I mean by I can be wasteful. I can do all the bells and whistles because again, most of us, our biggest consumption when it comes to power is our heating and cooling units. And it's just our leaky structures. We're using power and all this stuff just because we don't build very efficiently. So think of a way and talk to builders about an efficient way to build a home to where if you have a fireplace, you can light a fire and you can just have some kindling in there and your house is warm, right? You're cracking windows, right? So I think that's a smart way to build off grid is not just trying to throw up something cheap, but throw up something efficient that is sustainable with the resources that you have. And then the last kind of two part is plan for forgotten expenses. And these aren't necessarily forgotten, but maybe you don't know the extreme price that comes with them. Well water. You're going to have to get a well drilled. It's going to be expensive. We got a really good deal. We waited for a year to get our well water, but I think it cost us around $11,000. And that is literally a fraction of what everyone else quoted us. We got a $33,000 quote. We got a $40,000 quote. And then I think we got maybe a $20,000 quote. So your well is going to be expensive. Your septic tank. I was fortunate enough to know how to install septics and leach fields. So I did it myself. but those run a pretty penny. So electricity to your house, we already talked about that. Cutting roads, if you have to cut roads, that's expensive. I cut all my roads myself, which is great. But in the end, if you have to have someone do it, it's going to cost you money. And then the cost of transportation for your goods. Like if you are going to have contractors coming out here, deliveries coming out here, it's a long way to go. It's going to cost you money to get things sent out here. So just keep that in mind. If they're sending it from Lowe's or a lumber yard 40 miles away, there's going to be charges with that. Your contractor is going to upcharge you for that. Getting their workers out here, they're going to charge for that. So just know that there's going to be higher charges for that. And then in tandem with all of those things that I said, figure out what you can do yourself. Do as much yourself as possible. If you compartmentalize your build, if you compartmentalize the building of your homestead or your ranch, you'll realize there are a lot of little things that slowly take money out of your pocket that you can do yourself. For example, renting a skid steer and learning how to use a skid steer and cutting some of your own roads, you'd find to be a lot easier than you might think. Learning how to trench, renting a trencher. I think you rent trenchers for like maybe $100 a day, and trenching electrical lines or plumbing lines for your contractors. That alone can save a ton of time. They don't want to send an electrician out there who gets paid $60 an hour to trench. So if you can trench that yourself, you're going to save money, and keep things moving at a more affordable rate. So just look around your projects, kind of create a scale of what you want done, and then compartmentalize it and see which things you can do. Now, I don't suggest going in there and hiring a framer, but then saying you want to install the windows yourself, but then they're going to, side the house. Like that's just going to get in the way. That's going to cause more complications. That doesn't save the contractor money. It actually slows them down, and they might even charge you more money just to deal with you being there trying to do the windows. So I'm saying like if you can do a whole project, if you can trench, if you can cut your roads, if you can, frame your home, if you can install your roof, whatever it is, if you can take an entire trade off of your list, you're going to save a lot of money and you're going to be able to build your ranch and your homestead a lot more efficiently. But anyway, those are just some tips, some things that I ran into that I did for my home. If you guys have questions, please leave it in the comments below. And let me know if you want to hear anything else of my experience building this. I got a lot more to do on my ranch, so there'll be a lot more content like this. So make sure to subscribe, ring the bell, do all those cool things. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Much love, y'all.